American President Donald Trump has unilaterally extended the truce with Iran. Remember, after 40 days of war and 14 days of ceasefire, Trump is yet to deliver on his promise of a, quote, better deal that would force Iran to abandon its nuclear ambition forever. Now, Washington's quest for a nuclear deal with Iran is not new. Former U.S. President Barack Obama brokered an agreement with Tehran back in July 2015. This deal was officially called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. Under this agreement, Iran pledged to reduce enriched uranium stockpiles, limit centrifuges, and allow intense international oversight. But all of these restrictions had a timeline of 1 decade. In search of a better deal, Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA in 2018. He called it the worst deal ever. In fact, the Republican leader is now running into the same fundamental hurdle that once faced Obama. Cut to April 2026, Iran's insistence on reserving the right to enrich uranium, the demand of sanction relief, and the release of frozen assets still remains in place. Donald Trump's principal criticism of the JCPOA was Obama releasing $1.7 billion for Iran and putting an expiry date on this deal. But he's also mulling the possibility of unfreezing $20 billion, which are locked up in banks around the world due to sanctions. Hours before unilaterally announcing the extension of the ceasefire, Trump said that the deal with Iran will be far better than the JCPOA. However, the U.S. president fell short of providing an explanation of what this future deal would look like. Donald Trump has issued multiple last warnings to Iran, but his deadlines have failed to deter Tehran. In fact, not just on nuclear weapons, Iran remains firm on its missile program and the support for its so-called axis of resistance. The only pressure point that remains in place is the naval blockade of Iranian ports. But it is a double-edged sword. The blockade of Hormuz hurts Iran as much as it hurts American allies in the region. In short, we're currently in a no peace, no war zone. Trump is politically in a tight spot and maneuvering out of Iran war with a deal that would require him to make concessions, maybe the same ones that Barack Obama had made over a decade ago. Let me welcome my guests on the show. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis is a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. He's joining us live from Sterling, United States. Colonel David, good evening. Welcome to WION. My first question to you: do you expect Donald Trump to get a better deal than Barack Obama, considering the fact that the Iran of 2015 and 2018 is not the same Iran in 2026? Now it knows that it has a powerful hand over the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, no, there's no chance whatsoever. Now then, the best that we can hope for is just a face-saving limp away from this, and hope that we can get the Strait of Hormuz back open up and get the flow of oil, petrochemicals, fertilizers, and everything else back going to a normal speed, so that we can get the global economy, off the life support system that it's basically on right now. The thing is, there was a deal that in some ways was better than the JCPOA, and that was on the table by the Iranians on the 26th of February. 2 days before the war started, President Trump was delivered an incredible deal that the Iranians said they would go to zero enrichment, that they would not have any reprocessing potential, and that they would put on support for their proxies and their long-range missiles, at least on the table. But the two biggest things that President Trump has said has been driving all of this is no possibility of having a nuclear weapons was hand-delivered on that day, but instead he threw that in the trash and launched a war 2 days later. And now, because, as you point out, they have taken physical control of the Strait of Hormuz and demonstrated they can do it any time that they want to, we'll never be able to go back to a deal like that again. And now then the Iranian side is demanding, they're not going into negotiations being willing to hand over something. Now then they're saying, you're going to give me something like the frozen assets you referred to, security guarantees, and a number of other things.
So, Colonel Davis, help me understand this then. Then whatever Donald Trump says about an Iran deal, he rarely does not mention Barack Obama. Therefore, the question is it, a strategic thought that he puts in that, look, this is something that we will do better than Barack Obama? Or is it just a desire to rip through anything that is Obama's legacy?
Well, unfortunately, you have to say it's some derivative of both of those things, because he has throughout his career had for some reason, a special animus for Barack Obama. And anything that had his name on it, like the healthcare system, he's always just been trying to chop that down. And then this JCPOA, those are the two things that has his name that he's just been relentless trying to get rid of. And I just don't understand it, honestly, because he could have had something, again, even if that was his motivation, he could have had something that could justly be said, this was better than Barack Obama. The Iranian side was willing to do it. That prior to the war starting, they were willing to verbally say, yes, this is better than the deal we gave to Obama, helping Trump out. And for some reason, he just couldn't take the win. And now then he's going to have a strategic loss. That's already baked in.
Okay, Colonel Davis, my last question to you then. The earlier JCPOA under Obama administration had conditions which Iran agreed to, such as freezing nuclear ambitions and letting global energy experts inspect their nuclear sites in exchange for lifting of sanctions. Now, of course, you've got Donald Trump, who says that he will get a better deal. Do you think he will, get something better in terms of, concrete action or concrete agreements by Iran? Or he'll just, sort of have a deal where he'll put out some major highlights and say something like, they're going to be freezing their ballistic missile production and claim that as victory and get out of this war?
Well, listen, at this point, I don't think that that's even on the table. I don't think that the Iranian side will agree to anything like that. In fact, just this morning, just within the last few hours, they've been pretty defiant on their claims. They're saying, hey, we're not even going to come to the table until you lift your blockade, number one. And then number two, our national sovereignty on the reprocessed material, on the enrichment capacity, those are non-negotiable. So those aren't even on the table anymore. And the missiles are definitely not on the table. So right now they're saying, hey, you come to the table to give me something and then we'll talk. And that's very much different than anything President Trump has done before. And I don't know how we're going to get out of this one.
All right, let's wait and see how this moves forward. Colonel Daniel Davis, thanks very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Always my pleasure.